I'm Brittany Miller, 21 years old, and right now the only thing that feels real is the grit under my fingernails and the dust that never seems to leave my uniform. Tacoma, Washington, my hometown, feels a million miles away, a hazy memory of evergreen trees and misty mornings. Here in this desert landscape, every day is a test of endurance, a monotonous rhythm of duty, sweat, and longing. I signed up for this life, for the call to serve, but nobody truly prepares you for the ache of being so far from everything you hold dear. My anchor, my reason for pushing through was Alex, my husband. He's 22, just a year older than me, and also in the Army, stationed back near Tacoma while I'm deployed. We met a couple of years ago, a whirlwind romance that felt like destiny. He was a specialist then, and I was just finding my footing. When he made sergeant 5 months later, we knew the military's timeline for dating to marriage, especially with rank differences, would put us squarely in the middle of my deployment. We didn't want to wait. We were so in love, so sure. So we moved the wedding up. It was a small affair, nothing grand, but it felt monumental to me. Before I left, I'd poured my heart and soul into making a home for us. Bought a little house, filled it with furniture, things we picked out together, things that whispered promises of a future. I made sure he had full access to the car, to the house, to everything. I wanted him to be stable, comfortable, to have a solid base while I was gone. It was my way of taking care of him, of making sure he was okay even when I couldn't be there. The first few months of my deployment were tough but predictable. We texted, we called, we laughed across time zones. We missed each other, but we had each other. Then the cracks started to show. It began subtly, like a hairline fracture you almost miss. I remember the exact morning. It was ridiculously early for me, late night for him due to the 8-hour time difference. I'd sent him a text, not expecting a reply for hours, but my phone buzzed almost immediately. My heart did a little flutter. A quick response was always a treat. I typed back, asking why he was still up. His answer, delivered with a casual nonchalance that still makes my blood run cold, was that he was in a parking lot at a burger place at 1 a.m. with a girl from his squad. Let's call her Kara. Kara. The name itself felt like a punch to the gut. He explained, still so easygoing, that she'd had an accident with a generator at work. He'd driven her to the ER. And then instead of taking her home or going home himself, he decided they'd just hang out for several hours until 1 or 2 in the morning. Knowing they both had formation early that next day, my stomach twisted into knots. I tried to sound reasonable, calm. I asked why he didn't just drop her off, why he didn't feel safe being alone. He just brushed it off like it was nothing. She didn't feel safe, he said, as if that explained him staying out all night with another woman. It raised every red flag in my mind, a flurry of crimson banners snapping in a suddenly icy wind. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Kara became a regular fixture in his life. Late nights, solo outings, events I only heard about days later, if at all. Each time I'd try to talk to him to express my discomfort, I'd tell him, Alex, this doesn't feel right. I'm deployed, I'm relying on you, and this isn't what we agreed to. I never raised my voice, just laid out my feelings, tried to set boundaries. But he'd always wave it away, always insist. She's just a friend, Britt, you're overthinking it. He'd make me feel crazy, jealous, insecure. He'd say I didn't trust him when all I wanted was to trust him. But it wasn't just my gut telling me something was off. Kara, it turned out, wasn't exactly known for being a stand-up soldier. Word travels fast in the military, even across continents. I started hearing things through my own friends, people who knew Alex and were stationed near him. They told me Kara had a history of being trouble, shady behavior, a reputation for being disrespectful of boundaries. And she had a husband too, also deployed overseas, just like me. My friends, my leadership, even Kara's own leadership, they all started noticing. Anonymous complaints began to filter up to our first sergeant. They saw the inappropriate behavior, the way Alex and Kara were constantly together, the way it looked. For a while, our first sergeant just observed. But eventually the complaints, the obviousness of their interactions, grew too loud to ignore. Their chain of command stepped in. Alex and Kara were separated. She was moved to another platoon away from him. They were both formally counseled, told in no uncertain terms to stay away from each other. And I only found out because Kara's squad leader's husband, a good friend of mine from our old unit, called me one night. He just wanted to know if I was friends with Kara. When I said no, he laid it all out. Everything he'd seen, everything he'd heard. It lined up perfectly with the whispers that had already reached my ears, confirming my worst fears. The official intervention, the forced separation, it all just solidified the sickening feeling in my stomach. Something was very, very wrong back home in Tacoma. The call from Kara's squad leader's husband hung heavy in the air, even after I'd ended it. The buzzing in my ears wasn't the static on the line, it was the sound of my world cracking. Alex and Kara had been separated, moved to different platoons, told to stay away from each other. Not because I had complained, but because it had become so obvious, so blatant, that even their superiors couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was real, it was official. I tried to call Alex, but my voice kept catching in my throat. I couldn't even form the words. I ended up sending him a long, rambling text, trying to keep it calm, trying to sound reasonable, even as my hands trembled. I told him what I'd heard, how it devastated me, how much it felt like a betrayal. I asked him again to just be honest with me. His response was a wall of defensiveness. He acted insulted, hurt that I would even think such a thing. He called me paranoid, accused me of listening to gossip, of not trusting him. He spun a narrative where he was the victim just trying to help a friend and everyone else was making it into something it was. He even blamed Kara's husband, saying he was just jealous. The gaslighting was so thick I could almost taste it, even across thousands of miles. It was like he was trying to repaint the sky, telling me blue was green and expecting me to believe him. My gut, however, knew the true color. It knew he was lying. Things kept spiraling, each new piece of information a fresh stab. A few weeks later, I got a call from our property manager back in Tacoma. I braced myself, already expecting bad news. She sounded apologetic, a little embarrassed, as she told me the homeowners association had lodged a complaint. Someone had been parking a red-orange BMW in our driveway and it was hanging over the sidewalk, creating a hazard. My heart dropped. A red-orange BMW. Alex drove a blue SUV. I drove a gray sedan. There was no mistaking whose car it was. Kara. I remembered the details Kara's squad leader's husband had given me. Kara drove a distinctive red-orange BMW. It was as if she had left a giant flashing neon sign in my driveway declaring her presence. Right there in the home Alex and I had built together, the home I had furnished with love and hope while I was deployed, fighting for our future. I called Alex, my voice tight, barely holding back tears. The property manager called, I stated, trying to keep my tone neutral but failing. About a red-orange BMW parked in our driveway. The HOA complained. What was Kara's car doing there, Alex? There was a long pause, then a stammering, vague explanation about Kara needing to drop something off, about it being just for a minute. He said she had nowhere else to park, that it wasn't a big deal. He made it sound like I was making a mountain out of a molehill, when in reality the mountain was already crumbling around me. He couldn't even look me in the eye over video call, his gaze shifting, avoiding mine. It was a flimsy, transparent lie, and we both knew it. My head swam with images of Kara's car, a symbol of Alex's betrayal, brazenly sitting in my driveway for days, for weeks, while I was living in a tent, longing for home. A few days later, another friend, a corporal in my old company, messaged me. His wife, who still lived near Tacoma and knew Alex, had seen Kara driving her BMW again. But this time Kara wasn't alone. My friend's wife had seen a girl with Kara who looked exactly like Alex. Curly hair, glasses, the same build, exactly like him. And Kara's husband, just like me, was deployed overseas. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. It wasn't just a car in the driveway or late-night burger runs. It was her pretending to be him. It was a lie so intricate, so bold, that it made my stomach churn. The emotional impact of this information was devastating. I felt like I was unraveling thread by thread from thousands of miles away. My world, which had been so carefully constructed on trust and commitment, was collapsing. I was trying to focus on my mission, on the men and women counting on me, but a part of my mind was always back in Tacoma, picturing Kara in my home, in my driveway, with my husband. The anger was a slow burn, but beneath it was a profound sadness, a sense of having been utterly, completely, foolishly betrayed. All the while, another, equally insidious problem was festering. Before we got married, Alex, in a surprising moment of foresight, had been the one to suggest an infidelity clause in our prenup. It seemed like such a responsible, mature thing to do. It stated that if either of us cheated, with proof, that person would be responsible for funding the divorce for both sides. I remembered agreeing immediately, feeling a sense of security. I knew I would never cheat, so I thought, what a relief. This protects us both. It felt like a solid foundation, a promise written in legal terms. Months into my deployment, with all the red flags turning into full-blown crimson banners, I remembered that clause. I realized I never actually received a copy of it in the digital paperwork. I texted Alex on March 29th, the date now etched into my memory, asking him to send it to me. He promised he would. 4 days passed. Nothing. I asked again and again. Over 2 weeks went by and still no clause. His excuses started to trickle in, each one more infuriating than the last. My attorney says the prenup isn't enforceable anyway, he'd say, as if that explained not sending a simple document. Or, I don't trust you not to do something behind my back. My mind screamed me, not trust me. I was the one deployed, the one upholding my end of the bargain, the one being lied to. If it wasn't enforceable and he had nothing to hide, why couldn't he just send it? His hesitation, his constant deflection, only confirmed my deepest fears. The clause, I was now convinced, existed only on paper, or perhaps not even there. He was deliberately withholding it because he knew what it meant for him and what it meant for me. He was trying to trap me, to make me powerless. As if all of this wasn't enough, Alex's dad, a man who had always struck me as opportunistic, decided to make his move. About 5 months after I deployed, he tried to manipulate me into sending him money. He'd promised before I left that he would fix my car for free. A gesture of goodwill, he'd said. Now he was backtracking, demanding payment for work he'd sworn to do as a favor. When I confided in him about the growing problems with Alex and Kara, about the red flags and the sinking feeling in my stomach, I expected some sympathy, some concern, some fatherly advice. Instead, his only reaction was to ask for Kara's phone number. Kara's phone number? It was a bizarre, unsettling request, one that chilled me to the bone. What would he do with Kara's number? Was he trying to mediate, or was he trying to involve himself in some other, more insidious way? It felt wrong. After that, there were weeks of silence. Then he'd resurface, offering help again, but always with the caveat that I'd have to pay him. It was a blatant attempt to capitalize on my distress, to squeeze money out of me while I was at my most vulnerable. Every single person in Alex's life seemed to be a part of this tangled web of deceit and manipulation. The weight of it all was crushing. I was thousands of miles away, isolated, and everyone I thought I could trust, everyone who was supposed to be supporting me, seemed to be actively working against me. The clarity I so desperately craved was like a mirage, shimmering just out of reach. But I was learning that silence and deflection spoke volumes. People who had nothing to hide didn't act like they were hiding something. Alex's evasiveness, his family's opportunistic behavior, Kara's brazen presence in my life, it all screamed guilt. I wasn't chasing the truth for revenge, not yet. I was chasing it for understanding. I needed to know what I was really up against, what kind of person I had married, what kind of life I had been building. I was still deployed, counting down the days until I could return to Tacoma and face this head-on. Legal conversations were still ongoing, a slow, frustrating process conducted through emails and rushed phone calls. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this wasn't just a bump in the road. This was the end of the road for us. And I was going to make sure he knew it too. I just needed to figure out how to navigate the wreckage from across an ocean. Every day in the desert felt heavier, the sun hotter, the sand more abrasive against my skin. My mission, once my sole focus, now felt like a secondary concern, a thin veil over the churning chaos inside me. I'd be on patrol, my rifle slung across my chest, scanning the horizon for threats, but my mind would drift back to Tacoma, to that red-orange BMW, to Alex's shifting eyes on a video call. The constant need to be alert, to be present, was a battle I was losing on two fronts. I'd jump at shadows, not from an enemy combatant, but from the ghost of a happy memory, a reminder of what I thought I had, what I was losing. Sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself. When I did manage to close my eyes, I was plagued by dreams of home, twisted and distorted. I'd see Alex laughing with Kara in my living room, Kara's car parked brazenly in my driveway, the infidelity clause I desperately needed fluttering just out of my grasp. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the dry desert air offering no comfort, only a stark reminder of how far away I was, how utterly powerless. I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy for my squad. I'd smile, crack jokes, and immerse myself in the grueling physical demands of our work. But inside, I was crumbling. My appetite vanished. The MREs, already unappealing, became impossible to stomach. I lost weight, my uniform hanging looser than before. My friends, the ones who were still loyal, started to notice. They'd ask if I was okay, if everything was all right back home. I'd offer vague reassurances, unwilling to dump the full weight of my shattered life on them, not when they had their own battles to fight. The military grapevine, always buzzing, also brought me more unsettling news. Through hushed conversations and carefully worded messages from trusted comrades, I learned that Kara was not only still in Tacoma, but she was still very much entwined with Alex's life, despite the official separation. Seemed their superiors had only managed to push their indiscretions further underground, not end them. Kara had been seen at local spots near our house, places Alex and I used to go together. One friend on leave back in Tacoma even mentioned seeing Alex and Kara walking out of a movie theater late one night, laughing too loudly, too intimately for just friends. Each new piece of information was like a fresh wound, festering in the oppressive heat. I felt a growing sense of desperation. I had to get that infidelity clause. It was my only tangible weapon, my only hope for some semblance of fairness in the mess he was creating. I tried again, softer this time, in a moment of perceived calm between us. Alex, I typed, my fingers hovering over the keys, trying to pick the perfect words. Can you please just send me that clause? I need to understand my rights, to know what I'm facing. It's important to me, especially now. His reply was cold, distant. Britt, I told you my attorney says it's not enforceable. What's the point? You're just looking for trouble. He was actively denying me access to something that was rightfully mine, something that could protect me. The thought that he might have destroyed it, or that it never truly existed beyond a verbal agreement, began to gnaw at me. Was I truly so foolish? Had I been so blind, so trusting, that I'd walked into this trap without a single safety net? The answer, a bitter pill to swallow, seemed to be yes. My calls to the property manager became more frequent, each one filled with a silent dread of what new information she might unwillingly provide. She was kind, sympathetic, but her answers offered no comfort. No, Brittany, the red-orange BMW hasn't been back in your driveway since the HOA complaint, she'd say. But I have seen Alex with another car, a different one, parked on the street a few houses down, just for a couple of hours here and there. A different car. Alex, ever the opportunist, had clearly found a new way to hide Kara's presence, or perhaps a different woman entirely. The betrayal wasn't a single event. It was a sprawling, multiplying cancer infecting every corner of my life. My frustration simmered, then boiled. I started searching online, poring over legal forums, trying to understand what my options were from thousands of miles away. It was a dizzying maze of legal jargon, state laws, and military regulations. I felt like a lost child in a dark forest without a map or a compass. The legal aid office on base was helpful but limited by my deployment status. They could offer advice, but actual action had to wait until I returned. Gather your proof, Brittany, they'd said. Document everything, every text, every call, every email. It will be crucial. Proof. How was I supposed to gather proof when I was stuck in a land where the only thing I could prove was my own unwavering loyalty? The irony was a cruel joke. One night, a few weeks before my redeployment date, I received a package from home. It was from my best friend Sarah, who lived in Tacoma and knew Alex well. Inside was a care package filled with my favorite snacks, a new book, and a handwritten letter. I tore it open, desperate for a connection to home, to a life that still felt pure. Her letter was long, filled with everyday updates and encouraging words, but towards the end, her tone shifted. "Britt," she wrote, her usually bubbly handwriting now tight and small, "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I saw Alex the other day. He was at the farmer's market pushing a stroller. And it wasn't his sister's baby. I checked. He looked happy, too happy if you ask me. I didn't see Kara, but I had to tell you. A stroller, a baby." The words swam before my eyes, blurring the desert camp around me into an unidentifiable haze. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, ragged gasp. This wasn't just cheating anymore. This was a whole other level of betrayal, a secret life I hadn't even conceived of. The idea of Alex, my Alex, pushing a stroller with another woman, potentially with their child, while I was risking my life, fighting for a future that clearly no longer included me, shattered what little remained of my heart. The world went silent, then roared back with a cacophony of sound, the distant hum of generators, the shouts of my squadmates, the incessant buzzing in my ears. I felt lightheaded, my legs suddenly weak. I stumbled, gripping the edge of my bunk, trying to steady myself. The letter dropped from my trembling fingers, landing silently in the dust. This was it. This was rock bottom. All the previous betrayals, the lies, the evasions, they paled in comparison to this. It wasn't just me he had cheated on. It was our entire future, our dreams of a family, our sacred vows. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the sand gritty beneath my boots, the realization slowly settling into the deepest corners of my being. There was no more chasing clarity. There was no more hoping for understanding. There was only a cold, hard knot of anger, a quiet fury that had begun to replace the crushing sadness. The helplessness I'd felt, the isolation, began to transform into something else, a fierce, unyielding resolve. I was coming home, and when I did, Alex would finally understand the meaning of consequences. I would no longer be the naive, trusting wife thousands of miles away, unable to defend herself. I would be Brittany Miller, soldier, and I would fight for what was left of my life, even if it meant tearing his apart. The exact how, the when, the where, it was still a blurry vision through the tears, but the intention was forged in fire. The countdown to my return became not just a countdown to freedom, but a countdown to justice. I would ensure Alex's house of cards, built on lies and betrayal, would come crashing down around him. I just needed to survive these last few weeks to get back to Tacoma, and then the real battle would begin. The final weeks of deployment were a blur of intense anticipation and annoying dread. Every sunrise brought me closer to Tacoma, to the confrontation I knew was inevitable, but also closer to the full, unvarnished truth of Alex's betrayal. I packed my gear with a grim efficiency, each item handled with a deliberate slowness that belied the storm raging inside me. My fellow soldiers, sensing my shift, offered knowing glances and quiet words of encouragement. They didn't know the specifics, but the universal language of a soldier's heartbreak was clear enough. They understood the unspoken anxieties of coming home to a changed world. The flight back was long, a miserable stretch of hours punctuated by fitful sleep and waking nightmares. I stared out the window, watching the familiar contours of the world change from barren desert to lush green, a mirror of the transformation happening within me. I was no longer the soft, naive wife who had left Tacoma with a heart full of hope. The desert had hardened me, the betrayal had sharpened me, and I was returning a different woman, ready to face the fight. Landing in Tacoma was surreal. The cool, damp air of the Pacific Northwest, a scent I'd longed for, now felt heavy with unspoken truths. I navigated the familiar airport with a detached air, my eyes scanning the crowds not for a welcoming face, but for signs, clues, anything that could confirm or deny the nightmares that had plagued me. Alex wasn't there, of course. I hadn't expected him to be. I'd made it clear in my last terse communication that I would handle my own travel. The thought of seeing his face, of having to pretend even for a moment, was unbearable. I hailed a cab, giving the driver my home address, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. The drive through the city was a painful tour of memories. Every street corner, every landmark held a ghost of Alex and me, a phantom echo of a love I now knew was a lie. The evergreen trees, once a comfort, now felt like silent witnesses to my unraveling. As the cab pulled onto our street, my breath hitched. There it was, our house, the home I had poured my heart into. It looked the same, deceptively normal, but my eyes immediately darted to the driveway. No red orange BMW. That was a small, cold comfort. I paid the driver, my hands trembling slightly as I fumbled with the money, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The front door was locked, as expected. I took a deep breath, the chill air filling my lungs, steeling myself. I had my own key. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The air was stale, the house quiet, eerily so. It smelled faintly of him and of something else, something cloying and unfamiliar. My eyes swept over the living room, the furniture I had chosen with such care. Everything was in its place, almost too perfect, as if someone had tidied up for inspection. But then I saw it. On the coffee table, tucked beneath a stack of magazines, was a small pink pacifier. My heart pounded against my ribs. A pacifier. Sarah's words, pushing a stroller, not his sister's baby, echoed in my mind. The casualness of it just left there a blatant disregard for my existence, for our life. It was a cruel taunt, a physical manifestation of his secret life. The rage, cold and sharp, ignited within me. This wasn't just a pacifier, it was a declaration. He hadn't even bothered to hide it completely. It was as if he wanted me to find it, wanted me to know. The sadness that had been a constant companion during my deployment began to recede, replaced by a clear, focused anger. This wasn't about understanding anymore. This was about vengeance. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't break, not now. I had a mission, a new mission, and this time I was fighting for myself. The first thing I did was call Sarah. Her voice when she answered was a balm, a lifeline to a world that still made sense. "I'm home," I choked out, the words feeling raw. "And I found it," the pacifier. There was a moment of silence on her end, then a soft gasp. "Oh, Britt," she whispered, her voice full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry." I told her everything, the full story, from the burger place to the stroller to the pacifier lying on my coffee table. She listened patiently, offering comfort but also a fierce solidarity. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice hardening with a shared indignation. "I'm going to get him," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "I'm going to make him pay for every single lie, every single betrayal." My next call was to a lawyer, not the military legal aid, but a civilian attorney specializing in family law. I needed someone aggressive, someone who understood the nuances of military divorce, and more importantly, someone who could help me navigate the legal minefield of infidelity clauses. I laid out the entire messy story, carefully detailing every piece of evidence I had. The texts, the dates, the property manager's calls, Sarah's eyewitness account, and the pacifier. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, listened intently, taking copious notes. When I mentioned the infidelity clause, her eyebrows raised. "That could be very powerful, Brittany," she said, her voice firm. "If we can prove it existed and was agreed upon, it changes everything. We need to find that document." I explained Alex's evasiveness, his insistence that it wasn't enforceable. "He's hiding it," I stated, conviction in my voice. "He knows it's real and he knows what it means for him." The lawyer nodded. "We'll send him a formal request for discovery. If he still refuses, that in itself is a red flag. We'll pursue every avenue." The conversation, though daunting, filled me with a sense of purpose. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an advocate, a strategy, my focus sharpened. My next step was to secure the house. I changed the locks, every single one. It felt symbolic, a reclaiming of my space, a clear demarcation line between my past with Alex and my future without him. I didn't want him or Kara or anyone else from his deceitful world to have unfettered access to what was mine. It was a small act, but it felt empowering, a tangible step towards rebuilding. Then I started documenting everything. Every detail, every memory, every conversation. I went through old texts, screenshots, anything that could serve as proof. The military had taught me the importance of meticulous record-keeping, and now I was applying that discipline to my personal war. The anger was a constant companion, but it wasn't a destructive, blinding rage. It was a cold, calculating fire that fueled my every action. I was no longer the heartbroken victim. I was a soldier, and I was going to fight for my life, for my dignity, for the justice I deserved. Alex had underestimated me. He had seen me as the trusting, adoring wife, far away and powerless. But he was about to learn that Brittany Miller, a soldier from Tacoma, Washington, was not someone to be trifled with. The battle had just begun, and I was ready. The weeks that followed my return were a whirlwind of legal appointments, emotional upheaval, and a relentless pursuit of justice. My lawyer, Ms. Hayes, was a force of nature, her sharp intellect and unwavering resolve exactly what I needed. We laid out a strategy, a methodical dismantling of Alex's deceit. First, the divorce papers. Serving them was a stark, brutal act, a declaration of war that reverberated across my shattered world. I wasn't there when he received them, but Sarah told me he'd been livid, shouting at the process server, denying everything. Good, let him rage. His anger was a confirmation, not a deterrent. Ms. Hayes immediately sent out a formal request for discovery, demanding all financial documents, communications between Alex and Kara, and crucially any prenuptial agreements, specifically the infidelity clause. Alex's initial response, as predicted, was a mix of evasion and outright defiance. He claimed the prenup didn't exist, or if it did, it was unenforceable, just as he'd told me. He dragged his feet, providing incomplete financial records and refusing to acknowledge his relationship with Kara beyond a casual friendship. It was a predictable act of desperation, and it only fueled my resolve. Every day was a battle. I'd wake up in our quiet house, the silence no longer peaceful but deafening, filled with the ghosts of what could have been. The pacifier, which I'd carefully placed in a plastic bag as evidence, haunted my peripheral vision. I spent hours sifting through old photos, old texts, piecing together a timeline of his betrayal, noticing the subtle shifts in his behavior that I'd been too trusting, too loving to see before. Each discovery was a fresh stab, but also a renewed surge of cold determination. I was no longer crying. The tears had been replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. I was fighting for Brittany Miller, the woman who had left for deployment with an open heart and who was now back, scarred but unyielding. Sarah was my rock. She was there every step of the way, listening to my rants, holding my hand through the painful revelations, and offering her own support in practical ways. She helped me go through old boxes, searching for any scrap of paper, any document that might mention the prenup. We turned the house upside down, desperate. Nothing. It seemed Alex had been thorough, or perhaps the clause had never truly made it into the final signed document. My heart sank at the thought. Would all this be for nothing? Don't give up, Britt, Sarah would say, her hand on my shoulder. We'll find another way. And she was right. Ms. Hayes wasn't easily deterred. When Alex continued to stonewall, she pushed for a deposition. This would be a direct confrontation under oath where Alex would have to answer questions about his finances, his assets, and his relationship with Kara. I knew it would be painful, but I was ready. I needed to look him in the eye, to see him squirm, to watch his carefully constructed lies unravel. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday. The night before, I barely slept. My mind raced, replaying every conversation, every betrayal, every single moment that had led me to this room. I pictured Alex, his handsome face, the way he used to smile at me, the warmth in his eyes that I now knew was a cruel illusion. I dressed in a simple, professional suit, a silent uniform for a different kind of battle. I wanted to project strength, calm, and an unshakable resolve. Walking into that conference room felt like walking into a cage match. Alex was already there, flanked by his own lawyer, a slick-haired man who looked too pleased with himself. Alex looked different. His face was drawn, his eyes held a wary glint, and he seemed smaller somehow. He avoided my gaze, staring fixedly at the table in front of him. Kara wasn't there, which was a small mercy. Ms. Hayes began with methodical precision, laying out our case, detailing the timeline of his actions, presenting the evidence we had. The property manager's account, Sarah's eyewitness testimony, the texts, the pacifier. Each piece of information was a nail in his coffin, driven in with clinical accuracy. Alex, under oath, tried to maintain his facade. He stammered, contradicted himself, and offered vague, unbelievable explanations. He denied the pacifier was his, suggested it belonged to a visiting relative, a lie so flimsy it almost made me laugh. He insisted Kara was just a friend, a coworker he'd helped out, someone I was misinterpreting. But then Ms. Hayes dropped her bombshell. She presented a series of subpoenaed financial records, bank statements, credit card bills, and a particularly damning lease agreement. The records showed significant withdrawals and expenditures consistent with supporting another household. The lease agreement for a small apartment just a few miles from our house was in Kara's name, but the payments for the last 8 months were coming directly from Alex's personal account. And then there it was, tucked into the rental application, a copy of Kara's daughter's birth certificate. The father's name clearly printed, Alexander James Miller, my husband. The air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. A daughter, not just a baby but a little girl. My stomach churned with a mixture of shock, grief, and a renewed surge of venomous anger. He hadn't just cheated, he had built a whole other life, a family, while I was deployed, fighting for a country that didn't even know the war I was truly fighting. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more profound than I had ever imagined. Alex's face went white. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, his usual swagger completely gone. His lawyer jumped in, protesting, trying to have the documents dismissed, but it was too late. The truth was out. The little girl, Kara's daughter, was his, and she had been born while I was overseas, while he was telling me Kara was just a friend. The deposition continued, but the focus had shifted. Alex's lies had crumbled, exposing a horrifying reality. He was forced to admit to the affair, to supporting Kara and their child. The infidelity clause, though still unfound, suddenly felt less critical. The proof was overwhelming. He had not only cheated, but he had fathered a child with another woman during our marriage while I was deployed. This wasn't just cause for divorce, it was a complete annihilation of our marriage, a moral and ethical bankruptcy that left me speechless. The full weight of his actions crashed down on me. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the marriage but for the future I had envisioned, for the trust I had so freely given. But beneath the pain, a new emotion began to simmer, a cold, calculating resolve. Alex had thought he could hide this. He had thought he could live a double life, taking advantage of my absence, my loyalty, my sacrifice. He was wrong. Ms. Hayes, seeing my quiet fury, took control. She pressed Alex on his assets, his income, the full extent of his financial support for Kara. He tried to downplay it, to minimize his responsibility, but with the birth certificate and the financial records staring him in the face, his denials rang hollow. His lawyer looked defeated. There was no escaping this. When the deposition finally ended, I walked out of that room with a renewed sense of purpose. The initial shock had given way to a burning clarity. Alex had not only destroyed our marriage, but he had also, in his callous disregard for my feelings, handed me the ultimate weapon. He wanted to keep his secret life hidden? Fine, I would make sure the world knew. My revenge would not just be legal, it would be public. It would be a mirror held up to his face, reflecting the ugly truth of his actions for everyone to see. I wasn't interested in just a divorce settlement anymore. I wanted justice, and I wanted it to be as devastating for him as his betrayal had been for me. The soldier in me, the one trained to assess threats and strategize a victory, was now fully engaged. Alex Miller had made a grave mistake. He had messed with the wrong woman, and now he was going to pay. The pieces were falling into place, and the final act of my revenge was slowly, meticulously taking shape. The deposition was a turning point, not just in the legal battle, but within me. Seeing Alex's carefully constructed lies crumble, witnessing the undeniable proof of his second family, solidified my resolve. The sadness was gone, replaced by cold, unwavering fury. I wasn't just going for a divorce anymore, I was going for annihilation. My lawyer, Ms. Hayes, understood. When I explained my desire for public rather than just legal retribution, her sharp eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence. Brittany, she said, her voice a low hum, we have overwhelming proof. Adultery, conduct unbecoming an officer, dereliction of duty regarding his family. The military takes a dim view of such things, especially when a soldier is deployed. That was it, the military, our shared world. The place where Alex had built his reputation, the place where he had in his mind been untouchable. That was where I would strike. My first step was to gather all the official documents from the deposition. The birth certificate, the financial records, the admissions Alex had been forced to make under oath. Ms. Hayes helped me compile a meticulous package, each page a testament to his deceit. Then I wrote a letter. It wasn't a rant or an emotional outburst. It was a formal, precise, and utterly damning account of Alex's actions, addressed directly to his commanding officer, with copies sent to the Inspector General's office and the Judge Advocate General Corps. I laid out every detail. The timeline of Kara's affair, the red-orange BMW in our driveway, the secret apartment, the birth of their child while I was deployed, the financial support he had siphoned from our shared resources. I included the full Reddit post minus my personal details to show the scope of his deceit. I even included the anonymous complaints that had led to their initial separation, using the military's own paper trail against him. I mailed the package with a sense of grim satisfaction. It was done. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for it to sprout. While the military channels slowly ground into action, Ms. Hayes moved aggressively on the divorce. With the irrefutable evidence we now possessed, Alex had no leverage. The infidelity clause, though never found, became irrelevant. The proof of his adultery and the child born during our marriage meant he was unequivocally the liable party. He tried to fight to bargain, but his lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, advised him against it. He knew Alex was facing not just a painful divorce but potentially a court-martial, a dishonorable discharge, and the complete destruction of his career. The settlement was swift and brutal. I received the house free and clear, with a substantial portion of his military pension and savings to compensate for the emotional distress and financial strain he had caused. Child support for Kara's daughter was established, of course, but it came directly from his pay, leaving him with significantly less. He was ordered to pay all my legal fees. It wasn't about the money for me, not entirely. It was about the principle. It was about making him accountable financially for the choices he had made. But the true revenge, the one I had planned, was just beginning. The military is a small world, and news travels fast. The formal complaints I had filed began to circulate. Investigations were launched. Alex was pulled from his duties, confined to base, and stripped of his rank. He was facing a court-martial not just for adultery, which in the military is a serious offense, but for lying under oath, for conduct unbecoming an officer, and for demonstrating a profound disregard for the Army's values. His career, the one he had worked so hard for, was over. The whispers turned into shouts. His name, once synonymous with a rising star, was now uttered with contempt. Other soldiers, particularly those whose spouses were also deployed, looked at him with disgust. He was a pariah, a living example of everything a soldier should not be. Kara, too, faced the consequences. While she wasn't charged with the same severity, her role in the affair, especially with a deployed soldier, resulted in disciplinary action and a stain on her record that would follow her. I watched it all unfold from a distance, through official notifications and hushed phone calls from loyal friends still stationed with him. There was no joy, no triumphant celebration, only a profound sense of weary satisfaction. It wasn't a catharsis that cleansed me of all pain, but it was a justice that settled deep in my bones. One evening, a few months after everything was finalized, I was sitting on the porch of our house, my house, watching the Tacoma sunset paint the sky. Sarah was beside me, a comforting presence. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. It was a picture of Alex. He was in civilian clothes, looking thinner, older, and utterly defeated. The message read, he was dishonorably discharged, lost everything, working as a night clerk at a gas station now. I looked at the picture, at the hollow gaze in his eyes, and felt nothing. No pity, no lingering anger, just a quiet, unshakable peace. He had made his bed, and now he was lying in it. The next morning I packed a small bag. The house was mine, the divorce final, the legal battles won. But Tacoma, with all its memories, still felt heavy. I needed a fresh start, a new horizon. I decided to re-enlist, but this time I was going to request a transfer, a clean break from everything that had happened here. I was going to choose a new path, forge a new identity, not as Alex Miller's wife, but as Brittany Miller, a soldier who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. As I drove away, the evergreen trees of Tacoma faded in my rearview mirror. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt a lightness in my chest. My heart was scarred but not broken. I had learned the hard way that trust was a precious commodity, easily shattered. But I had also learned the strength of my own resolve, the power of fighting for myself. Alex had taken so much from me, but he hadn't taken my spirit. And that, I realized, was the most poetic revenge of all. My future was unwritten, but it was mine, and I was ready to write it, one brave, independent step at a time.